Hey everybody, this video is called What Ought to Happen in Criminal Law. And tonight we're going to continue our pass-through study here in the book of Deuteronomy. We're going to look at the 19th chapter, where we're going to be looking at Moses addressing criminal law. And through chapter 23 here, you're going to see that Moses is practically focused on social and community order. And these laws, they focus on interpersonal relationships. And so verses 1 through 3 here, it says, when the Lord your God has cut off the nations whose land the Lord your God has given you, and you dispossess them, and dwell in their cities and in their houses, you shall separate 3 cities for yourself in the midst of your land, which the Lord your God has given you to possess. You shall prepare roads for yourselves, and divide into 3 parts the territory of your land, which the Lord your God has given you to inherit, that any manslayer may flee there. So, as mentioned, for the next few chapters, Moses is focusing on community order, socially and community-wise. And to go with the cities of refuge, you'd have to go back to Numbers chapter 35 to see what Moses is talking about here. And if you want to see that video, you need help finding it, let me know. I'll send it directly to you. But chapter 35 of Numbers, it focuses on the purpose of these cities. But Moses, he continues speaking here about the 3 cities of refuge that were to be set apart in Canaan after the conquest of the land of Canaan. And in Joshua chapter 20, verse 7, you'll find Israel's obedience to this command. And these 3 cities to the west of the Jordan River were in addition to the 3 already established of the east, as recorded back in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 41 through 43. In the cities of Bezer, Ramoth, and Golan, and they were the cities of refuge on the east side. And Israel was to make roads to make access into the cities easy. In verses 4 through 7, it says, and this is the case of the manslayer who flees there, that he may live. Whoever kills his neighbor unintentionally, not having hated him in time past, as a man goes into the woods with his neighbor to cut timber, and his hand swings a stroke with the axe to cut down a tree, and the head slips from the handle and strikes his neighbor so that he dies, he shall flee to one of these cities and live. Lest the avenger of blood, while his anger is hot, pursue the manslayer and overtook him, because the way is long, and kill him, though he was not deserving of death, since he had not hated the victim in time past. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall separate 3 cities for yourself. So we see that Moses, once again, he's focused on what is the purpose of these 3 cities of refuge. And it was a place of protection. It was a place of protective order for those who accidentally killed somebody. And it would also be a refuge place for those who were, justified through self-defense. And in ancient Israel, the avenger of blood was responsible to make certain the murder was punished. And their job as the avenger wasn't to figure out the circumstances. If somebody died under someone else's hands, that avenger was to get back at them. And we know from Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, that God had called for the death penalty of murderers. And the avenger of blood was an appointed member of the family, designated to protect the honor and the lives of the family. And they would avenge to get honor of the family name. And accidental killing didn't matter. As I mentioned, they didn't care about the circumstances. And if we were together chopping wood, Moses is given the example, and the axe head fell off and went into you, and you died a gruesome, hard death right there, that would be accidental. And if it was me, where the axe broke, I would need to go into the city of refuge for protection, for security. In verse 8 through 10, it says, "Now if the Lord your God enlarges your territory as he swore to your fathers and gives you the land which he promised to give to your fathers, and if you keep all these commandments and do them, which I command you today, to love the Lord your God and to walk always in his ways, then you shall add more cities for yourself besides these three, lest innocent blood be shed in the midst of your land, which the Lord your God is given you as an inheritance, and thus guilt of bloodshed be upon you." So verses 8 through 10, as Israel expanded, so were the cities of refuge to expand as well. And the refuge cities had to be near for manslayers to take refuge. And 3 more cities of refuge would lead to a total of 9 in all. So as the land grew, there had to be more refuge cities. In verse 11 through 13, it says, "But if anyone hates his brother and lies in wait for him, rises against him, and he strikes him mortally, so that he dies, he flees to one of these cities, then the elders of the city shall send and bring him from there, and deliver him over to the hand of the avenger of blood, that he may die. Your eye shall not pity him, but you shall put away the guilt of the innocent blood from Israel, that it may go well with you." So one might, argue with these cities of refuge that what if murderers tried to blend in with the population in seeking refuge to be protected from the avenger? Well, we see that in verses 11 through 13, there were leaders of the city that were to hear every single case, and they were to dictate what type of homicide was it? Was it a justifiable homicide, accidental homicide, self-defense, or was it a straight-out murder? And when they judged these things, if someone was straight-out determined to commit, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, third-degree murder, whatever case, something that's not accidental or a protective type situation of self-defense, then that person would be handed over to the avenger. There would be no safe haven for them, that the city was to work with the avenger to get the justice. And actual murderers would be delivered over to the avenger, as mentioned, and God wanted the innocent protected while he wanted the guilty punished. And God is full of law and order. In verse 14, it says, "You shall not remove your neighbor's landmark, which the men of old have set in your inheritance, which you will inherit in the land that the Lord your God has given you to possess." So landmarks, you probably know what those are. I know from my grandparents' house, they have a stone that splits the line of the property between neighbors and all that. And that's basically what it is. It's stones that bear inscriptions which identified the owner of property. And moving the boundary stone was equivalent to theft, as put in by Solomon in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 28, and Proverbs chapter 23, verse 10. And we see that personal property was entrusted right given by God, and that was outside due process of the land. That property should never be taken. So for those who like socialism, socialism is anti-biblical. In verse 15 through 20, "One witness shall not rise up against a man concerning an iniquity or any sin that he commits. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses the matter shall be established. If a false witness rises against any man to testify against him of wrongdoing, then both man and the controversy shall stand before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who serve in those days. And the judges shall make careful inquiry, and indeed, if a witness is a false witness who has testified falsely against his brother, then you shall do to him as he thought would have been done to his brother. So you shall put away the evil from among you. And those who remain shall hear and fear, and hereafter they shall not again commit such evil among you." So verses 15 through 20. So as talked about just a few chapters ago, more than one witness was necessary to convict somebody for a crime and to punish them. And the principle safeguarded against false witnesses who might rise against someone that has a personal issue, or, where I'm from, we call it beef with somebody. And this would protect against false witnesses bringing untruthful charges against their fellow Israelites. And by requiring more than one witness, greater accuracy was gained, and it showed better evidence. And in some cases, though, there would only be one witness who brought a charge against someone. When such a case was when that happened, the case would be brought to the central tribunal of priests and judges for trial. And upon investigation, the testimony of the witness, if they found was false, then that false witness would carry the burden that they were trying to get carried out on the other person. So false witnesses in Israel were not tolerated, and they weren't let off very easy. If they were accusing someone of a crime and they lied about it, and that crime called for capital punishment, the false witness would face capital punishment. And so having these strict laws, it might sound harsh with today's society, with how weak and liberal our court justices are. It was served as a great deterrent of people wanting to do it. When there are serious consequences, you're going to have less and less people even thinking about doing bad things. And today we have forensics and DNA and fingerprints, all that good stuff, and videos and cameras and filmage and all that. And those things help us in the matter of law, where we can regard something as evidence through those types of things in technology. But Israel did not have these things among them. They relied credibly on multiple witnesses on carrying out justice. And the death penalty against false witnesses was effective, as I mentioned, and it deterred to crime. And I believe what the Bible says here, and I believe that a strong deterrence, strict laws and consequences result in less crime. And personally, I am a death penalty supporter. I wish that we had the death penalty carried out more here in the United States today, especially against rapists and murderers. And what drives me nuts is there's a guy in California who took people hostage with his buddies. I think it was a couple decades ago now, like 27 people total, a school bus driver and children. They buried them alive and tortured them. And this guy is eligible for parole, and he's been granted parole, so he's going to be getting out of jail. And to me, stuff like that type of dark crimes, like, these people don't deserve to walk out of jail. And so, that's why I believe today the courts are weak and inconsistent in their punishment. And when courts are weak and inconsistent in their punishment, it's not going to deter crime. And only effective punishment can deter crime. In verse 21, wrapping up the chapter here, it says, "Your eye shall not pity, life shall be for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot." So the principle of the legal justice or law of retaliation was given to encourage the appropriate punishment in the criminal matters of cases. And where there may be a tendency to be either too lenient or too strict, it was to set a fair justice system. And false witnesses were to face similar punishment to that they intended on their victim, as mentioned, and retribution was to be a check on the desire to revenge. It was not a license for revenge. So the eye for the eye law, it wasn't, that you poke someone an eye out, it's the punishment should make sense for what the crime was. So to wrap up here, nice short chapter, Moses, he revisits discussing the 3 cities of refuge to be provided from Numbers 35, and he discussed the purpose of the cities of refuge, and he discussed the appointment of additional cities of refuge. As the land grew, then they had to have more. And Moses gave guidance on what to do with the guilty who seeks protection in the matter of refuge. They were to be challenged, and if they were found to be trying to evade their avenger when they committed purposed, or if they committed intentional murder, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, whatever the case was, then they weren't to be protected or to be given over for the punishment to be carried out against them with their avengers. And so Moses, he moves on discussing the principle of the landmark, and he reflects again on the principle of true and false witnesses and how important as a witness to always tell the truth. And false witnesses, they were liable of penalty that was equal to what would happen to their victim if they were falsely convicted. And Jesus' trial had many false witnesses who rose up and lied against him as well. And I want to go over to Matthew chapter 26, verse 59 and 60. These are going to be some popular passages here at the end of Matthew that you'll be hearing preached across many churches and maybe on the radio about Jesus' trial and his crucifixion, because Resurrection Sunday, for those who observe it, that's a couple weeks away now. So Matthew chapter 26, verse 69 and 70, I believe it was. 59:60, sorry. Says, "Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last 2 false witnesses came forward and said, 'This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days.'" So the false witnesses that rose against Jesus gave contradictory and confused testimony against Jesus. And under the Mosaic law, they should have been put to death, because that's what they were focused on in punishment in Jesus that they saw falsely. And the Apostle Paul quoted from that passage in verse 15 when he wrote to the Corinth church back in the chapter of church discipline. And in church discipline, before one is removed from the church, there must be multiple witnesses that someone is unrepentant. And that's why you see, as we look at Matthew chapter 18 next, that conflict was also to be handled with the matter of multiple witnesses before somebody was totally discarded. And so Matthew chapter 18, verse 15. Says here, "Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. But if he will not hear, take with you 1 or 2 more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and as a tax collector." So the issue should always first be dealt with within conflicts. The issue should always be dealt one-on-one. We should never bring issues in front of multiple people if we don't try to work on those issues between us and the one who offended us. And if the issue couldn't be addressed, if the person was unrepentant, then they were supposed to get another person or 2 to confront the person again, that should witness that reconciliation efforts were being made. And if the problem still was unrepentant, and it was to be brought before a disciplinary matter to the church, and they should be treated as an infidel or an unbeliever if they remain unrepentant. They should be taken out of the church, as we see in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, when Paul says that in verses 11 through 13, to the church about removing such unrepentant people. And so Moses, he wrapped up the chapter. He speaks on an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And basically, he's speaking against retaliation. And it's fleshly of us to always want to do more, most cases. Our flesh wants to see someone who hurt us face harder consequences. You should get more than what they did against you. And, I went through that phase too. Even though our law books are written when I was in a lemon lawsuit that I should have gotten double to triple in monetary loss, I only got the basic because, we have very liberal courts around where I live. But in all fairness, I still got justice in the end because I got my money back on that piece of junk car. And so it's fleshly of us to want more done to an offended party than what was done to us. And I want to go over to Matthew chapter 5. Jesus speaks on the matter of the eye for eye law when he was on the Sermon on the Mount. And you're going to see the Sermon on the Mount. I reference it a lot when we study here through the book of Deuteronomy. In Matthew 5, verse 38 through 42, it says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away." So Jesus, he confronted the Jewish people for taking this law from Deuteronomy and applying it to their personal matters and the purpose of personal vengeance. And the eye for the eye law was intended to be the judges' guidelines in the courts of Israel. It was never meant to be in personal relationships. And it was guidance to justice. And I want you to also, as we wrap up here, to reflect on the cities of refuge. If you listen to Numbers 35, you're going to see that I spoke about it then as well. But we should look at the city of refuge as a picture of us. When we go into Christ, we find refuge into Christ, as pointed in Hebrews chapter 6, verse 18. And then Psalm 46, verse 1, it says that God is our refuge, our strength, and he's always ready to help us in time of trouble. So that's going to wrap up this video. We'll see you next time as we're going to look at the guidance concerning warfare. And I know it's going to be a very sensitive topic as we have a nonsense war taking place out in Ukraine right now. But we'll catch you next time. Not sure when I'll put the next video up, but I'll make an announcement. So have a great rest of your night. God bless.